Welcome back to today's video. Today is Friday, June 20th, 2025, and today we are going to be talking about the city of New York and their mayoral election as it heads into the final stretch, as this next Tuesday will be primary day on the Democratic side in the city of New York. A very, very interesting mayoral race has been underway for quite some time now, one that we have been covering on this channel, and for good reason. Right now, former Governor Andrew Cuomo, governor of the state of New York, who resigned amidst allegations surrounding misconduct back in 2021, has now become the frontrunner in the 2025 mayoral election. Now, Andrew Cuomo's resignation and the misconduct surrounding it has become a very major player in this year's mayoral race, a race that is going to be largely defined by what happens on Tuesday and the takeaways that it will mean not only for New York, but national Democrats and the coalition that has been building on both sides of the aisle. Now, the race is ultimately divided between two primary candidates. As I mentioned, Andrew Cuomo, the frontrunner, the former governor, is running against 33-year-old Zohran Mamdani, who is the self-described Democratic socialist running to the left of Andrew Cuomo and is the primary and true only real opponent to Andrew Cuomo in this New York City mayoral race. And looking at where we are in the United States, in New York City, we are faced with where it is as the largest city, one that has a lot of implications not only on a local level, but on a much more broader level in the state of New York, on the national stage, when it comes down to large city Democratic governance. There are so many things and so many reasons why there's so much focus on the New York City mayoral race, and it's because it comprises 8.3 million people. I mean, you are talking about a city that has a larger population than a significant portion of states in the country. And so when we think about also, too, just how insanely close this race has gotten over the past really 2 months, you have to ask why. I already talked about Andrew Cuomo, but also, too, the Democratic Party is finding that within its own party apparatus, there is fracturing building. Ranked choice voting is a key and necessary component of the New York City mayoral primary. First implemented last time around in 2021, ultimately led to Eric Adams having a much closer race than what a traditional first past the post type of system would have ended up with. And so what we saw back then was that coalitions surrounding who you're ranking second, third, fourth, and in some cases, fifth really can make a difference in the inevitable final rounds of an election. And what we are finding is that it is very similar this time, as Andrew Cuomo largely did start out with a seemingly insurmountable lead in the New York City mayoral primary when the initial data was being run. Back in March and April, Cuomo led by 30 points, 18 points, 28 points, 22 points, 32 points. But over the past month, really, that lead has shrunk quite significantly down to the most recent lead and the most trusted pollster here, I think, Marist College, showing Cuomo with a 12-point advantage. Now, looking at this new poll, as I have been maintaining throughout all of the coverage on the New York City mayoral race, Andrew Cuomo has maintained his frontrunner status largely on the backs of minority voters. And what you will find is that recently today, with Jim Clyburn, yes, the same South Carolina congressman that led Joe Biden to the presidency back in 2020, is now endorsing Andrew Cuomo, boosting his appeal and his percentage likely of the vote share amongst black voters, which are a key and necessary component of a winning constituency in the city of New York, as is the case on the broader national scale. Now, this endorsement comes in right around the 11th hour, just days before the primary, as Mamdani received major endorsements from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who held a joint rally with him last week, Senator Bernie Sanders, who has come out in full support of Mamdani in this race, and these are very big, really conflicting endorsements, and it reminds me a lot of the 2020 and arguably 2016 Democratic primaries. I told you that I thought New York, in some cases at least on the Democratic side, was a microcosm of what we might see on the national stage, and we're starting to see that really brew out in true favor. Mamdani endorsed everybody but Cuomo. He said, rank me first, but then rank Brad Lander second, and then rank everybody else. You have 5 options, 6 primary candidates, just don't rank Andrew Cuomo. And it seemingly was something that almost everybody was getting on board for. Adrienne Adams, however, the city council's first black speaker, doesn't seem to be too on board with that idea, at least not yet, and maybe not at all. The problem here lies for Zoran Mamdani that in the data that we are looking at, where he does narrow Cuomo's lead in the New York City mayoral race, the primary support that Mamdani relies on isn't minority voters. Again, reminding me a lot of 2020 and 2016 in the Democratic primary, as we did see that the base that was most palatable to voting for Bernie Sanders, or open to the idea of voting for Bernie Sanders, weren't older black voters. They weren't younger black voters. They weren't, typically speaking, at least in every sect of the country, they weren't the Latino voters in Florida or Texas or whoever it might be. It largely was a whiter electorate and a younger electorate on the Democratic side voting for Bernie Sanders. And that also explains a little bit about why he did better in caucuses versus traditional primaries, why he did better in terms of rally size and engagement and small donor enthusiasm, in contrast with smaller sized crowds but larger vote share percentages for Joe Biden and Michael Bloomberg and other candidates that didn't seem to have the juice and energy that might have been explained by high levels of engagement on social media and high levels of enthusiasm at rallies. And obviously we know rally numbers really don't dictate anything. They didn't mean anything in 2024. They didn't mean anything in 2016. They don't mean anything. But they do provide a bit of understanding and context around, is your base the type to really ride or die for you in an election? But after all, a vote is a vote. And so I bring this all to circle back to what we see now with Mamdani, who is, in fact, really struggling amongst minority votes in this city. We're finding that the more centrist, more moderate, more middle of the road former governor, Andrew Cuomo, is winning 48% before this Jim Clyburn endorsement, 48% of black voters in the city. Now, you might think, okay, doesn't that mean 52% are voting elsewhere? No, not at all. In fact, a huge chunk are saying they're undecided. But in terms of what we're seeing in terms of respective vote share, Adrienne Adams, who in fact is not cross-endorsing Zoran Mamdani, even though he cross-endorsed her, she is in second place amongst black voters in New York City at 12%. Mamdani is just at 11%. And so when you think about what that means in the context of a New York City mayoral race, it largely does explain why Cuomo maintains this lead. Now, Marist College is not the only pollster in this race, but the reason I pointed out is because they were right on the money back in 2021. Marist, they did a poll June 14th, 2021. And what they found was that in the first choice, it was very similar to what we actually saw. Eric Adams would take the lead, then it would go in Catherine Garcia, Maya Wiley, Andrew Yang, and that's what we saw. The first four, we saw Adams, Garcia, Wiley, Yang. But then the tabulations went through. And by the time we reached the final round, they predicted accurately that Eric Adams would win the mayoral election. Now, they missed the margin by about 9 points. And I know in a normal type of election, that would matter. But also to understanding that this is the ranked choice voting tabulation, and there are far more errors when it comes down to a ranked choice voting tabulation. But ultimately, they were right about who would win. Not to mention, though, that I will say this, that this poll was taken, as it was for Andrew Cuomo, before the really big surge in enthusiasm for Catherine Garcia and Maya Wiley by the progressive members of New York City and the members that matter in the city of New York, in the state of New York, and on the national Democratic political stage. That is what we saw. Now, similar optics, but Cuomo is pushing back. It was really moving in Mamdani's favor. I mean, we saw that the numbers were doing well. It was taking a 30-point deficit and making it a 10-point deficit. It was narrowing up to a point where we saw a coalition of Democratic leaders endorsing Mamdani, where they otherwise might not even have touched the race, with somebody who, again, is a self-described Democratic socialist. But now, I think, Cuomo is fearful that he's going to lose. He's calling in very big names in communities that Mamdani and all of the other candidates, Adrienne Adams included, are just simply not doing well in. And so what we might see is that very similarly to how we've seen 2020, 2016, is that minority voters might lead Cuomo to victory, the more centrist, moderate, middle-of-the-road candidate, just as Biden was in 20, just as Clinton was in 16. Ushering that in, that governance, that leadership in the mayoral election could very well be our reality on Tuesday. And that isn't to say that, there's any one reason that Zoran Mamdani or any of the other candidates aren't doing well amongst minority voters. I mean, at face value, there is nothing that you can say broad strokes explains why Cuomo does so well, except for the fact that upon leaving office, you did find a lot of resistance to his resignation. Not from some of the cities and the state's elected officials. We saw a lot of calls, same people endorsing Cuomo now, that did ask him to resign from the governor's office back in 2021. But resistance in terms of voters and portions of the electorate that were still in favor of Andrew Cuomo, that still approved of the job that he was doing as governor. And those voters, that was 4 years ago, are voting now again in the nation's most populous city. And Cuomo's name ID is 100%. Everybody knows Andrew Cuomo in New York, whether it was the COVID-19 pandemic, whether it's a family legacy name, whether it's how he's built his name up in New York City again, near 100% name ID. Zohran Mamdani has largely gone under the radar for the past 4 months as a lesser-known candidate, obviously. And even now, there are huge portions of the electorate, 10, 15%, but that's still a huge chunk, that don't even know who he is. And I think that's been the biggest hurdle for all these other candidates too. I mean, Brad Lander, way lower name ID. Adrian Adams, way lower name ID, because they don't have the money. They don't have the entrenched, political apparatus to actually support them and uplift them. And again, Andrew Cuomo, as governor of the state, as a very recognizable name, face, last name, whatever it is, in this city, it does very well for him. And that's why he's polling so well. And so when you look ahead to what might happen come Tuesday, maybe Marist College might be off again. Off in a way that wasn't too off, right? They might be right that Cuomo's going to win. But they say Cuomo's going to win by roughly 10 points. You can see it here if we go ahead and just jump over to the actual website. They're finding that in the final round, it's a 10-point delta. Now, maybe this is good news for Mamdani, right? They said that it was going to be a 14 or a 12-point difference, ended up being a 1-point difference. So if it swings by the same amount, in theory, Mamdani would be within, the grasp of victory. But it probably won't be that way, and it's really dangerous to try to extrapolate polls that way without including the caveat that it is dangerous to do that. But you can see here, right? Cuomo starts out with 43%, Mamdani at 31%. Everybody else, a distant second and third. Brad Lander at 8, Adrian Adams at 7, Scott Stringer at 4, everybody else 2, 1, or less than 1%. Round 2, eliminated. Round 3, eliminated. And you can see that it is primarily, support going to Cuomo and Mamdani at an equal rate. By the time you reach 3 rounds in, Mamdani's gained a point, Cuomo's gained 2. By the time you reach the 6th round, right, you're seeing that a lot of this support isn't going directly to Mamdani in the way that Mamdani would need to win. And that's why he loses the final round by roughly 10 points. In terms of net gain, Mamdani has gained the most by round 7, 14 points compared to 12. But it's not enough. Right? This whole idea here that you don't rank Cuomo, you rank 5 and you leave him off. That is what might have worked if everybody was on board, but it doesn't look like the stars are aligning for Mamdani to win this race. It did for a while. We talked about it, right? The surge and the enthusiasm, the momentum was on Mamdani's side, and in a way it still is. The data does clearly show that it is tightening. But races tighten 2 weeks before an election and then move back the other way. Things like that happen all the time, and weather is a huge unpredictable factor that might impact what happens in New York. New York is expected to be extraordinarily hot next Tuesday. And the reason why that matters is because people don't like waiting in polling locations without AC. Not every polling location has AC. And to just put things in, to context, next week on Tuesday, about 100 degrees Fahrenheit in the city of New York on Tuesday. I had to open up my weather app because I knew it was something there. My phone is in Celsius. Forgive me. I'm trying to learn something new here. But point is, right, 100 degrees Fahrenheit on election day that's going to peak around noon when people get out for their lunch hour and they go to vote. Are they going to vote? Would you? And that's the real question. Obviously, voting matters. If you're watching this, you're already predisposed to say, hell yes, I'm going to vote. But would you? If you had to wait in line for an hour on election day and say, you know what? I want to vote today for Adrian Adams. Would you wait for an hour in 100-degree heat? So we are expecting in this early voting, a hypothetical reality is that early voting dictates what happens this Tuesday, rather than the other way around. The early voting is complementary to the election day vote. Now, a lot of people will vote, and I really do hope that they get air conditioning and they do what they can to make sure that people have the ability to vote. That's always better, right, for democracy, more people voting. But it is a known factor but previously an unknown one, that might actually have a direct impact on what happens. And knowing what happened in the last mayoral race, how close it was, every single thing makes a difference. Every statement, every mess up, every scandal, every endorsement, every ad buy, every canvas. In races that are as close as this one, and if it is as close as this one, everything would have been different had just one thing changed in the last 2 weeks. And so it will be fascinating to watch the elections come in as the ranked choice voting is tabulated, as voters make their decision, and as we do see the numbers gain and move away as candidates get eliminated into the final round, because this is a race between Andrew Cuomo and Zohran Mamdani. And Mamdani, who has largely benefited from the effect of the past 2 weeks being the momentum on his side, that momentum today might come to a screeching halt. But we don't know. The data is out. No polls are in the field currently. We won't get any new data barring a surprise from a major firm, and that rarely happens because they like to get a lot of press on it. They like to get a lot of attention on their organization, but weird things happen in American politics. Sometimes campaigns do last-minute fields. I don't know what it would help them with, though, in the final 4 days, but it might. But right now, we can only wait for the election. And seeing how it has developed over the past 2 weeks has been nothing short of a spectacle in this city. And it will be very fascinating to watch the election results pour in on Tuesday, talk about it on Wednesday, and huge impacts and implications for the National Democratic Party, for the statewide Democratic Party, for local governance in New York City that we will talk about later on. And so keep your eye on New York City. Definitely a race to watch. Definitely one that has been quite interesting, certainly, to say the least, over the past 2 months. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video for you to watch, and then a playlist for my 2025 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.